A lot of things come into play in terms of where are they located? Are they centrally located? What kind of programming do they have today, right? So the lake, I'm blanking on the name, forgive me, is it Lakefront Park or Lakeside Park?
Lakeside Memorial.
Lakeside Memorial Park. So that would be like a community park that would be a great candidate for a challenge course, considering it's very central. It is a community park, so it's serving a wider population. But then the question with that one is, you guys, there's already quite a bit of programming there. So is adding another thing at that park going to kind of overwhelm that space or not?
Yeah, I think parking is going to be a huge issue of a challenge courses on Belt Park.
Right.
And we may not, well, I can anticipate the church not being really happy with buses coming in.
Right. Yep, so as a visual, if we look at concept 3, so the parking lot at the Golden Valley Challenge course is 18 stalls. I think it's actually 19 stalls, and one of them is an ADA accessible stall. And if we look at the parking lot that's drawn in concept 3, if you were to push that parking lot footprint to be kind of flush with the end of the building, so push it back, so that would be pushing it west, and have it be flush with the end of that building, and then have that little hammerhead kind of turnaround, that would be the same size as that parking lot in Golden Valley. So that's a very specific reason as to why I wanted to know what the demand is on that parking lot, and if they've seen that that's an appropriate size, or if we would anticipate a lot of overflow kind of going into the church.
And being that I live right down that street, 12th Avenue, my husband and I were talking about trying to get out of that parking lot, because you have cars here, haven't drawn them in, but
Right.
many cars that park on both sides of South Shore.
Yep.
And so it's just inching to get out of the street to turn. And I just think that's something we have to really think about, getting them out of the parking lot. It's great to have it.
Yeah.
But getting in and out is a challenge.
Yeah, I think if we were to consider a parking lot on the site, we would for sure have to look further into where exactly that driveway lies. Here it is nice because it aligns with another street, which is kind of good to congregate accesses. But exactly, the issue might be we need to limit the on-street parking near that driveway so that people do have visibility trying to pull out of that parking lot.
Kids are walking back and forth to get
Right.
to the park, and the cars are there. It's pretty congested. But the other concept too had one pulling off, so
Yep.
I think it'd be the same concern.
Yep, so concept 2 would be kind of a one-way parking lot, which would also allow for drop-off. So the parking is on that west side so that people could pull in, drop off people on the passenger side directly into the park, and then pull out. So that's exactly the point, is to kind of show a couple different options so we can talk through them.
I'm curious about the tennis courts.
Yes.
Do we have other community tennis courts? Or, I know there was talk of the school, using school courts. We have a great pickleball destination in the city already. So to invest in a few more pickleball courts away from the pickleball campus, I don't know if that's a great plan.
Okay.
Isn't it just a restriping of the tennis court? You're not putting in a,
Yeah, currently the courts have striping both for tennis and pickleball.
it'd be just on top of the tennis court.
But if
But you
there's
raise
no
a
need for,
question.
if there's no need for tennis courts in that location, we wouldn't have to bump the big playground down and invest in that.
Tennis courts stay pretty busy in the summertime.
They do.
Since we have the pickleball, but I wonder if that'll happen now that pickleball's got a destination.
Well, I've seen a lot of people playing tennis, particularly at night, because you can light them, so they play at night. So I don't know that I'd wanna get rid of the tennis court, because I think it still stays pretty busy.
Doug, wasn't that one of the things the kids said too? They didn't we ask them about the courts and they wanted to keep them?
The tennis court?
I guess
Yeah. I thought we asked
I thought they weren't
specifically.
really
I can't
big on
remember.
tennis, though.
Okay.
I think that was I think one of our biggest question marks is, do we keep those or not? And I think having 2 basketball courts, or at least more than 1 full court, was kind of a good consensus of that would be a good investment. I think we could justify the 2 full courts being there. I like the design with at least the half court option, just for kids or adults to practice free throw shooting, for example. So anything more than the one, I think that was consensus. I think the tennis courts was still a question, and I think we're gonna get into more of the final survey results, and I think there was questions specific to that, so that might be helpful to see where feedback came in for tennis specifically.
And I'm not sure that people are understanding that thanks to the community, the school is going to redo
Yes.
the north courts, and so that's gonna be a nice addition. Before you couldn't even use them. So it's another addition for tennis courts over there
Okay, at there,
at the senior high.
okay,
You know,
all right.
Those accessible to the public?
They are at certain times. Yep.
The park shelter, what size is that, or capacity-wise, what is that holding?
Well, in terms of facilities, we would intend to include a warming house, a picnic shelter, so essentially part of it would be covered but open, and then those permanent restrooms. This specifically is essentially diagrammatic, but we would intend to look at something that would include a warming house of similar size to what you have, and then kind of adding almost, I would say it would be essentially doubling that warming house, kind of on itself, just as a good visual, to be able to include those spaces. And that would be pretty flexible. I mean, for master planning, kind of what we look for in the master plan is, do we want that structure, or do we want a structure like that? And approximately where do we want it? And then we can go into the details of how big it is, right? As long as we're not jumping from one scale to another, and as long as the design that we look to has enough flexibility in it that we could make kind of small tweaks here and there.
And the only reason why I asked if we're gonna have restrooms there year-round, I think a lot of other cities have an enclosed shelter like that the community can rent out. And it might be kind of nice if we're going to we don't have an enclosed, a decent enclosed shelter that the community can rent out. So it might be nice to, if we consider that option, think about how we develop that in a way that it could be used as an enclosed for birthday parties or whatever somebody wants to do with it as a community event.
Also, just kind of looking at the graph, it doesn't seem like there's a lot for volleyball. So what if a person, just for an example, on concept number 3, if the volleyball court went out and the challenge courts went in that area, we could use that whole corner for a little bit more parking. And versus, that would be an idea I'd have.
I guess I would add to that, though, that again, the volleyball is pretty popular.
It is,
Summertime.
it is.
Yeah.
Very
Okay, I was just
I mean,
kind of looking at the
I would
graph
say-
on
I
it.
would say once school's out, that at least probably 5 out of 7 nights of the week, there are people
There
playing.
is,
Yeah.
okay, okay.
I feel like there was a written comment or saw it, it might have been
The
email or
pack.
something about, there was something about enhancing the volleyball courts. Was it in
Yep.
the survey
Okay.
results?
That was from the school.
Yeah, the school.
Okay,
Yep. Yeah, so also with these concepts, we would want to look at, I think their comment was, or at least from the PE teacher, the comment was to define the edges better, so they can actually play a game and know where out is and what's in. So they can play a more formalized game there.
What would be lit in your concept number 3? What will have lighting?
Yep, so that's a totally kind of other topic that we can cover. We can light everything, we can light certain things. I think that's kind of a discussion once we nail down the programming, to talk about what needs to be lit versus what doesn't. So, right, the important thing to think about there is what time of year are people using these certain activities? And therefore, what is the daylight situation for that lighting? Or if we have a looping trail, do we want to have lights along that loop to make sure that's well lit the entire way? I feel like that's a discussion we can have once we nail down more of the programming and the layout.
I mean, because presently, the tennis courts are lit, and there's
Yep.
lights for the skating rink.
And you could expand the skating opportunities if you, depending on the base of the tennis courts, if the tennis courts are lit, and you can use that as a subsurface under your sheet of ice and just put boards,
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying.
yeah. So,
So to that, Jack, we previously had talked about, and I think in this, talking about this conversation tonight and then going to the next renderings after this meeting, I think we should look at those sport courts that have the boards in them that are multi-use. So it's a hockey rink, but then 2 basketball courts. So we could incorporate that into the design next time if that's something that we would like to see. And I think that way, I know I've briefly met with our superintendent of public works and he had some comment as well. You know, you want to think strategically, in the next 5 to 10 years, are we going to still have Tower Park and the 2 hockey rinks there? Or do we factor that into this design here? What if we did, his recommendation was looking at maybe 2 of those sport courts that are enclosed, that there you have 2 hockey rinks in the winter, but then you also have, one of them can contain 2 basketball courts, then the other one can contain your tennis court, so that you're multi-purposing it for multiple seasons. So that was one comment and consideration. So I think looking at in the next design, it would essentially be the same, but you're also then adding 2 hockey rinks in the winter. So he had some comments, and to go to your question about lighting, again, I briefly talked to Dave and I agree that that's something we'll pinpoint once we get going, and but that there obviously is electrical there, it's just figuring out what to light. Same with irrigation, we talked about, let's just say we have 1 ball field, you know, we could consider irrigation in there and make 1 really nice ball field and continue our partnership with the Forest Lake Area Athletic Association and give them 1 really nice playing field there that can be irrigated. So, I mean, that's a conversation kind of as we move along. And then just to the layout, I know the 3 different concepts all kind of resemble the current layout, but I think, you know, I read through the hundreds of comments that were typed in, and some people talked about the accessibility piece. So if they think of kids in strollers or people individuals in a wheelchair, and you think of access from where they're parking. So let's just say 50% of them are parking in the church parking lot. So it's way over here. Well, to get to the playground is probably one of the furthest distances from the parking lot. And that's probably one of the most heavily used locations. So is there an opportunity to restructure as we're talking about programming and amenities, let's see what we know we need to nail down, but now we're talking about layout. So is there a way to reconfigure things so the playgrounds, if we have to move it or anything, is there a way to look at that in a different location so it's a little more accessible to where people might be parking? So it's people with little kids, you know, they maybe don't want to go across the whole park to get to the playground kind of thing. So I think kind of tonight, you know, if there's anything else on your presentation, get through that, but then talk about the amenities. I think we've seen a pretty overwhelming response for that from the Political Action Committee, the students, and the community, that there's that desire for that gathering space, warming house, built-in restrooms, and I think that would be the focal point. There are some, not challenges, but I think that's gonna end up being pretty centralized in the park. I'll have to work with staff, you know, our city engineer, where the sewer line matches up so that we can really place that first, and then I think it's gonna end up being right in that central point of the park, and then continuing to disperse amenities around that. So I think that's kind of the direction tonight is, I think the conversation about the tennis courts, do you want to continue to see that in the next rendering? Are there any other layout differences that you'd recommend, or amenities that might be missing? Is that, I think, kind of what we're looking for?
Yep, and I think we're good on the presentation. I think this discussion came at the perfect time, because that is really what we want to talk about, is what are the programs that we're including? And almost how many of those programs do we want to include, right? So I think basketball court, we want to try to include 2 of those courts if we can, from what we've heard, or at least have that extra half court. I think tennis was a good thing to bring up. And we can look at an alternative that combines all of those. I've even seen sport courts that have, I think the striping gets a little bit crazy, but I've seen sport courts that have basketball and tennis on them.
And pickleball as well?
Well, right, so then if we throw pickleball on top of that, that's what I mean with kind of the line work on those mats get a little intense. But if that's something we want to look at, because if those are all amenities we want to include, but we still want to maintain some kind of open space, and we potentially want to have this challenge course somewhere, we for sure need to keep the playground. It's looking at how we can kind of consolidate those things to make it work.
Can I ask a question about the
Yeah.
open space?
Yeah.
What are you looking at that to be used for? I mean, just so it's not so packed next to each other, or are you expecting some activity on the open?
Yeah, that would just be general play, or if someone wants to, kick around a soccer ball or
Yeah.
play tag.
Like Frisbee.
Yep, play Frisbee.
Right now, that's ranked pretty highly on how people are currently using the space.
Yep.
And it also comes up in the comments, people talking about they want space for little kids to just kind of run around, burn off some energy. So it's intentionally unstructured.
I know they like it for walking their dog and playing Frisbee with their dog. Like it a lot for that.
Yeah, so thinking of this also serves as a sledding hill in the winter. And so you obviously don't want to put any physical structure at the bottom of what that sledding hill might be. So keeping in mind that maybe that's just a good space, or that's the outfield of a ball field, so that in the winter people can still sled. You're not going to put the sport court there, and
Right.
then take away from the sledding hill. So then in the summer months, that could be your open space potentially.
That's one of the reasons why I like in concept 3, that parking down there on the bottom side. I agree we need to make this park accessible, and I worry about the sloping issue that we have. But one of the comments that you'll see a lot when there's snow is, where's their good sledding hill in Forest Lake? And people direct them to White Bear Lake or out of Forest Lake. So if,
That one, we have to really publicize that or make it better. We've got
Yeah.
a great one at Sherwood Park. It's a super sledding hill.
so and I think we promote that, but I think we also maybe potentially know that people are using this as a sledding hill too. So if we adjust the slope, or if we put parking down here, and then I agree, I was almost wondering why the volleyball wasn't near basketball and tennis. So you've got all your courts on one side, and then your playground area would be closer to that parking lot. And it splits up your picnic shelters, a little bit. But the other thing I would really like us to consider is, as we replace playgrounds and make that investment, port in place. If that is what we think is an optimal solution. And some more, I think we have an opportunity here to create more inclusive play options than we did at Lakeside. So I think as we look at what is in there and how they get there, I think that's going to be important to think about.
Is there any kind of a ratio for like permeable surfaces and things? Or
What do you mean ratio?
do you have to be concerned with, okay, you have to have 25% permeable surface on a development, or not so much? I guess what I was just wondering about is where the parking lot is, while you do have some green space and the tree and things like that. Why couldn't that whole area just to the north of the park shelter in concept 3 just all be parking?
Right, and that's
That would give you, if buses are gonna come in there, they'd be right next to the challenge course and things like that.
Yep, that would definitely be an option. And like I said, for this concept, right now we've got it shown kind of to the point where it is, kind of the point where the parking lot ends, to kind of show that smaller option, just making sure we have an ADA accessible stall and a couple of spots. But that walk that's just to the west, or just like up on your page, that walk is essentially pushed back, that if we had concerns about adding parking at the park, we could keep it pretty small. But then if we saw, wow, we needed more parking for this challenge course, that could very easily just be pushed back without having to tear out any walks or making any big changes besides curb changes. Yeah, but I don't think we would run into, to your point about permeable surfaces, I don't think we would run into any like watershed
Okay.
concerns or anything,
Right.
just for that parking lot.
One point for discussion, kind of the warming house shelter piece. I know the feedback was a lot of people would be open to changes to the warming house, and just for discussion for the group, I know that another comment was about the hours it's staffed, and that was just a reduction in, I think, 2014 in staff hours for the warming houses to be open. So is that a consideration of, do we need a full warming house in the winter at that park? Does that look like? Are we gonna repurpose the existing, or is that a new facility structure to come in? I think some conversation around that, I think that's gonna be one of the focal points of the park, is this gathering space. So just curious to know if anyone has any thoughts on that a little bit more.
Well, if we're planning ahead to have ice sheets out there, we better accommodate the warming house.
Right, okay, so
I'd
thinking of
like to
that.
see it made bigger into something that could be rented, though. Expand it
An
to
indoor-outdoor
something-
rental facility.
Because we don't have any indoor facilities, so what would that look like, and what would it cost if we made it?
Well, and just adding the bathrooms is gonna be huge, because in the winter, who in the world, they don't like to go in the summer, but in the winter, who in the world likes to go into those porta potty? I think that's the best news on all of them. And plus, it helps the church. That was one of the big requests from there, and I think that could be put into the deal very easily as far as trading with the parking, because that's a big concern for them. But it's a big concern for people at the park.
Another thing that I was thinking, all the concepts are great, they look great, but one thing I hope, like the new rinks we have in over here, the ice skating rinks, I mean, we're trying to get everything in here, but it's only a mile and a half to go over to the other park where it's fully skatable already. So I'd like to keep one of these three concept plans. I think one of those three would be great, instead of overthinking it and putting the skate, I don't even know.
Like the boards up?
The boards up and all that, just keep it simple, yet modify everything.
The only reason I brought that up is I don't know the plans within the city of that facility. That's the Public Works shop where the staff is based out of, and I don't know if that's gonna be retained, or if that's gonna potentially go away in the next 5 to 10 years. I don't know the timeline or the plans for that, but that was the point of, if those two rinks would go away in 5 to 10 years, then we have the hockey rinks covered with this development project. Like I said, I don't know, to have to circle back with city staff on what those conversations are, if that's, going to happen or not, and when. But that was the reasoning for that, so that if they're there now, but if those go away in 5 years, then we do have hockey rinks established.
Well, one of the things I was kind of thinking about too was that towers, are pretty much hockey oriented, whereas Belts is pretty much pleasure skating.
Right.
And, if you ended up by having two sport courts with two rinks, now you could do one court as a pleasure skating and one as a hockey rink then too.
Because they don't match.
Right, they would be separate, similar to, right now, we would still need to maintain one pleasure rink, and that would be indicated no hockey on this rink. Rink A, rink B, play hockey on there. So I think there'd be that separation. So there still would be that opportunity for pleasure skating versus hockey.
I'm not sure I'm sold on a challenge course yet. Is that gonna sustain long-term? Or is it a fad? And I don't know the answer to that, but that's why, if we could get somebody that's had it in, and what the usage is long-term. And then, what is the maintenance like on that? Because isn't there, don't they have electrical under the ground, or where they're stepping on certain things happen? So is there a different type of maintenance associated with that?
There's a timer that you hit kind of when you start
Okay.
and when you
So
finish.
okay.
And then the surfacing is generally like a turf,
Okay.
like an artificial turf.
So they do run electrical under the turf.
Yep.
For the timer, so it's all sensory based, so
Yep.
that when you're at the start, it can sense that you're there, and and then the timer starts, and when you get to the end, you hit timer to stop it. So there is
Yep.
there is an expense that I do have those notes from when I had that conversation. An alternative could be something more like, to kind of meet that like 13 age range, more of, in a small footprint, you could do more of like a little Ninja Warrior, kind of more exercise or like challenges like that, where this is more of like a challenge course. So you're going to run straight, you're going to bounce off of these things, you're going to climb over this, or you're going to just do like a 40-yard dash. So I think there's some differences. Then there's more of like go across the monkey bars, more of like a fitness element to it. So that could potentially be another consideration for that little area if it's not the timed challenge course where you're investing in that, all that work to get it timed out. And we could explore more of the Ninja Challenge, and I don't know if you've seen that show, but there's just more of like a fitness element to it. Monkey bars are really popular. Things like that would challenge that 13 to 15, 16 age range a little bit more.
A ninja training.
Yeah, like a ninja
Course.
training. And those can be, and I have some ideas, and I can send in an email of what that would look like. But that's a small footprint too, and might just help with that demographic.
So
And
does-
adults.
Does Golden Valley have somebody there all day long?
No.
And so that the timer holds up? I can just see all the abuse that must take.
Yeah, well, the timer was, it was still, somebody must have been there right before I had gotten there, because the timer was still running. The clock itself is mounted up pretty high. As far as the actual button for the timer, I'm not sure what kind of, how people are using that not related to the course.
Yeah.
Chairman, I would like to have us explore too. I love the idea of a challenge course, but I'm looking at all of these and knowing how they look really nice on the paper here, but knowing that corner and that problem, I'd like us to put one in where there's more green space. Is it Officer Silva that there's lots of green space out there? And there wouldn't be a parking situation, but in this particular case, I'm having trouble even thinking of it there. But you may come back with more information, I don't know, but wow.
As we look at the good, better, best, do we need to consider the economics of this project? Because that's going to make or break many of the components and save us a lot of headache of talking about some of these ideas.
And that's what I'm missing too, is what are these options?
Because I could see.
What's the price tag?
We've all got a playing surface here, and boy, the basketball component costs this much, and no, we can't do that. Do we care? Is it our
I think
responsibility?
I think we do care, but I think part of the master plan process is to really identify what the ultimate wish would be that would serve the community. And that's why you're going through the survey process, getting a really strong response on a very short period of time. And I think some of the information has been pretty telling. Again, people want bathrooms there. A lot of people are going to this park. The playground's really important, and access to that. So I think some of the feedback we've received is very important, and I think part of the master plan process is like, what is our ultimate wish of this park so we're meeting the needs of the community? We are responsible, and the economics part of it matters, but I think timeline-wise, if we have the vision of what we think we should accomplish here to best serve the community, I think then we work on when that funding is available. How do we align the resources to make that happen and project it out that way? So I think that we don't want to miss on some of those key elements, because if we go through this process and we just, we don't reconstruct the courts, for example, and we just keep patching it, like we're going to have the same issue all the time. So I think we're investing in fixing that long term. So I think there's value in really making sure it's what you guys would recommend for the community based on the feedback that we're given. And I think then it's a matter of when we can do it, when resources align. So would it maybe affect our timeline on it? Possibly. But I think really hitting the nail on the head of what the community's asking for is important. And I guess that's my opinion on that and the part of the process. I think if we land in a comfortable middle zone where we feel like we're accomplishing what the top 3 or 4 requests are of the community, I think that's a good win. And I think if we're hitting the main things, that's important. So maybe not the challenge course at this time, or maybe it's a layout that offers for that in a different time and place as a phased approach.
My
Right.
concern with the challenge course is that it's going to make it a destination park, and it's not a destination park. And sometimes more isn't always better.
Right,
And we've
so,
heard they want a better shelter and better court system.
so let's take that off of the concept plan, and see what space that allows for us to do other things. Maybe it's just, instead of that, let's add another second volleyball court, low cost.
They wanted
Demand.
tetherball. That
Yeah,
was one
and
of the
adding a
things
tetherball.
we Talked about.
Yeah, and
is-
tetherball we didn't include because we can kind of drop that in.
Yeah.
It's
So
pretty small, so we
maybe-
didn't
Yeah.
include
Where do we
that.
want
a bit
that
more
last?
Green space or a picnic table and tetherball or something, or.
Another comment from Public Works,
Yeah.
just with the baseball field, let's just say, give or take, the shelter is gonna be smack dab in the middle, where I know that sewer line lines up pretty close to the centralized location in the park. So for conversation purposes, let's plan on that, like, kind of right in the middle, give or take. But he had some comments too about how the ball field, so let's say we end up with one ball field, but reorienting it so that home base is more like kind of towards that middle of the park, so that people can get into the park, but then the picnic facilities right there, kind of closer to home base and where the dugouts are gonna be. Just think of accessibility and kind of draw people more to that centralized location. So kind of maybe reorienting home base so that it's more towards the center of the park. And then you can, along kind of by like the church parking lot and South Shore Drive, have like an outfield fence or whatnot, so that, if we want to, I guess we couldn't do a fence we just keep that as the green space then.
Yep.
So that's a green open space and still the sledding hill. But maybe consider looking at that at a different angle. Does that make sense?
Yep, no,
It
absolutely.
might help bring things a little closer to the center, and that might even help. We talked about the entrance to the park, so maybe that would be South Shore Drive, kind of smack dab in the middle, where the current park sign is, if you guys are familiar. So maybe that's kind of where we draw people in, and then whether or not we add that parking space, but that would be right there as well, as you kind of come in that entrance with some parking. You got your ball field and your pavilion, and kind of build from there. So I think hopefully that, maybe we can see that in the next concept.
Do we know how taking away one of the ball fields is gonna affect FLA? And, is that hurt? Do they use that all the time, or is that?
They do use that. The city right now is working with the schools, and so in the next couple of weeks, we're gonna do an inventory of all facilities, so all ball fields, green space within the community. I'm sure there's some impact, but I would have to follow up to see like how significant that would be. I think from survey results, I think there was kind of an indifference on whether or not that remains. So I should know in the next couple of weeks if that would be adverse for the community.
Yeah,
Most of the ball that's being played down there are little girls. I'm not saying girls are they're little. Some t-ball. And it's probably used about 3 nights a week.
Okay.
But I don't know that, taking away one field would affect it that much. The one thing, Jamie, that in orientating the home plate to the center, now you have your outfielders and all your fielders looking into the sun. Which typically you try not to orientate a baseball field that way, or any ball fields that way, because it gets to be a little dangerous. Just a thought.
Good thought. I should have known that from experience. So, no, yeah, maybe that's not the right way, but consideration of whether or not we can reorient that somehow, we can maybe take a look.
Yep, we can take a look at that.
But one other thing, we did do that land swap last year at Fenway Fields, and I'm thinking that we are gonna be putting in ball fields over there down the road, so if we lose one there, we're gonna gain it over next to the ice rink, next to the ice rink, so we do have that land also.
I think kind of going to the economics piece, I think concept 3 talked about like having to, it looks the same, but this is like reconstructing the playground space. I think that's probably an unnecessary cost. If we can come up with a solution to just reconstruct the basketball tennis court area and not have to reconstruct and move the play space, I think that's an unnecessary cost and wouldn't be fiscally responsible to recommend that. I know it was just a concept piece, so nothing against
Yeah.
the recommendation. But like, that's a way that we can say, let's just keep that container space there. One consideration, to expand on the playground piece, which was a heavily used item in a lot of kids, is maybe there's a way to look at using the topography and incorporating a second tier of a playground below that. Like, I've seen slides that kind of go into the topography, so maybe add a container, like a smaller, like 2 to 5 year old container space below the hill there, is just an idea of expanding that if there's the need for, and the desire for the playground is an important factor. Maybe that's just something that would be of consideration or
I
whatnot.
think if you do that, then you need to move or consider where the volleyball court is.
Right.
Right.
Because you'll have kids getting pelted with potentially, depending upon where you put that. So you have to just,
I like concept.
yeah, think about that as well.
When you push the slope east, how far would you push that? Because that then encroaches on the sliding hill area. So
Right, so that would depend, obviously, on the concept and the layout that we end on. Just looking at the topography of the site now, if we take the tennis and basketball courts in, and that kind of cattle path that's on the east side of there, just to get a walk in there, I would anticipate we'd have to push that slope a little bit, just to get that wide enough and get clearance around the existing lights that are in there. So that would be moved just enough to get that walk in there. Without trying to make it too steep, right? If you just build out, then we'll make it steeper, so we might need to push a little bit. The real challenge with the topography changes would be, so like in concepts 2 and 3, we have kind of this central north-south connector trying to get us kind of from that lower level to the upper level. That's where, to make that accessible, we really have to pull that slope out. To get up that, the other option, which we have shown in 1 and 2, would be essentially constructing a ramp. So if we kept that park pavilion in that very central location, we could incorporate an ADA accessible ramp kind of within that structure, or kind of that footprint of the building and then sort of the space around the building. We could incorporate a ramp into that so that we don't necessarily need to change the topography, but people can still get from that sort of top level to that bottom level at that central location. So that's kind of to be determined, but I think in terms of cost, when we talk about cost, I mean, topography is a big one. Anytime we're gonna change topography, that's gonna add a lot of cost. And then just with the other elements, I think the other important thing to keep in mind is, let's for sure focus on programming and what do we wanna include, because within each of those elements, there's gonna be different levels, right? If we say we want, a building that we can use as a gathering space and restroom and people can rent it out, well, that can look a lot of different ways, right? This building was built, it's a beautiful building, and took a lot of, or was kind of like on that higher level of structure, right? Versus you can have a much simpler park structure that can serve the needs and people will be happy to use. That's not, top of the line, high-end architectural design. So I think that's important to keep in mind. And also with the sport courts, obviously if we're gonna do a sport court that has all of these different pieces to it, that might have a cost associated with it, but then you're also consolidating all of those to one footprint you need to maintain. So there's kinds of, I guess, pros and cons or different levels, and we'll look into that kind of later in this process. I mean, pulling together a cost estimate is part of what we've been hired to do. So we'll definitely be pulling that in and then identifying, should we do a phasing plan where we can do X and Y? Or do we want to go after some funding opportunities so that the city can come in and redo this all at once?
So from a programming perspective, we heard, I'm just trying to recap. make
Yep,
sure I heard.
perfect.
So remove the challenge course for now on a rendering or whatever you would call this. And then tennis courts, was that removed or not? Did we talked about it, but we didn't decide. Would we want tennis courts here or not?
I think we keep them.
I do too.
I mean, I'd be in favor of trying to keep, especially if there's lighting over there now, because if we move it, do anything else, reconfiguring too much, we're not gonna be able to reuse that lighting, and I think that'd be important from a cost perspective to try to reuse that, so I'd be in favor of at least keeping them there.
Okay.
And if we're anticipating the movement of Tower Park sometime, I think it's wise to consider investing in a high-end product there. And if we're looking at moving Tower Park, concept 3 really isn't gonna fit. Concept 2 with the park shelter where the infrastructure dictates it to be in the center, I think we have to go with where the
We will.
systems are, right?
will.
The
Yep.
Sewer system, I think it's,
Yep.
we can't reroute that.
Yep, I reviewed that and it's pretty centralized.
So really, concept 3, that park shelter, that's
You
not,
have to move.
that's not right. So we should be looking at concept 2.
Well, it makes me happy because I liked concept 2 myself to start. I do like the ball fields over here and the volleyball over there, but I think we have to keep both of those wherever we put them.
So amenity-wise, we're also thinking bathroom
I think it's definitely.
Yep.
and a shelter of some type.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Were you gonna say something?
So what if we, so it sounds like concept 3 with the two full basketballs courts and 2 tennis courts. Would that be an option to put on number 2? Because it sounds like the church is wanting a, basketball. Would that be an option?
I think that it would just be, we could swap, on concept 2, I think we could swap tennis courts with basketball, but we wouldn't have 2 full basketball courts because that would require reorienting or reconstructing the playground space.
Right.
So you would have 2 full tennis courts, the 1 full basketball court and the 2 half courts, but we could put the basketball closer to the church.
Right.
So swap those 2. But it'd be the same as what you see in concept 2 for what we would get.
Size-wise.
Size-wise. We would not have 2 full basketball courts and 2 full tennis courts.
But you could, you just take the west strip of basketball, tennis, playground, picnic shelter from 3 and superimpose it on number 2. What, it's just money. You'd just be moving the playground.
Right, which is get back to that conversation of if that's what you want to do and propose
Right.
as your ultimate wish. I mean, that would cost more money to do that.
Right.
So I think the comment with the playground, with moving the playground, and why we even showed it in concept 3 is if we do want to switch out the equipment and we do want to switch out all of that surfacing, that's going to be a cost in and of itself. So yes, it would be more to take out that concrete surround, but of those 3 items, the concrete's going to be the cheapest part of that playground. So not saying that we should do that or shouldn't do that, but just,
More clarification.
right, so thinking through if we're kind of taking out everything from this playground except the concrete and we really want 2 full basketball courts, if that's very important, we could make that happen. But that's just the question is, do we need 2 full courts or do we need somewhere people can stand and shoot around kind of casually?
But I'm looking at it from the perspective of, do we need a destination in 5 years when Tower Park is gone? Because their maintenance facility is only gonna grow on that footprint as the city continues to grow. Or do we have satellite facilities throughout the city that our maintenance department can use?
So are you back to 3, basically, with the park shelter moving to where it is right now, basically? Park
All of-
shelter and,
Concept 2 with the west strip being concept 3, the top third.
Yep, so that top level of concept 3 and then kind of the bottom level of
Yeah.
2.
I guess we've been trying to figure out something with the mulch, the rubber mulch or the chips or whatever.
Yep.
And if we're redoing this, I think we should put in the pour and play. It just makes.
Sure.
We're doing it, it makes sense.
And I think that's something that Public Works and I think we've just kind of generally have been talking about is that's a new park standard moving forward of if we do a park development, let's put the port in place and invest in that because of the less maintenance, the accessibility factor. So I think that we would want to quote and get the price for the port in place.
So just to kind of summarize, basically taking option 2, but the west side of option 3 and replacing it with the west side of option 2. And that has all the amenities and programming that we would be looking for then. Is that correct?
That's
That's,
close,
yeah,
I think.
I think so
But
too.
I know Jamie and I are going to talk afterwards, and I just really like to throw it out to this group because the Rotary has already kind of designated part of their fundraising that they're going to be doing in August to Belts Park. And what they're going to be looking for is an item, something that they just don't have to have people think whatever. And I'm just thinking either the inclusive playground material would be one that people could get their heads around. And it has already been talked about at the Rotary as making it a more inclusive area. And then, or the bathrooms and the shelter. So I just throw that out, so when Jamie and I talk, if any of you have an idea.
Yeah, so when I did submit that, I did submit that to the Rotary with the specific piece, knowing that we would invest in some form of inclusive playground or inclusive features. So I know they're looking for an image on what that would look like, and I'm working on that, but that's, I think that also the conversation we've had is around the playground is to invest in new equipment with inclusive features to go with that port in place. So that will give us the opportunity in the future, in a couple months, or as we move forward in this, of where can we repurpose this Belts Park equipment to a different location in Forest Lake, and include in this process a price for inclusive playground. And that's what the Rotary is fundraising a portion of their, donating part of their fundraising dollars towards some piece of inclusive equipment specific. And I think that again ties in with the objective to, and the timeline we're on with the outdoor recreation grant for improvements for safety and accessibility.
All right, so when we started the presentation, you were looking for feedback on programs and amenities. Do you
Yep.
feel like you've gotten that feedback? Or
Yes.
is there anything else that you would need from us at this point, or?
Nope, I
Okay.
think that is good, and we can take that, I mean, if we want to talk about next steps, I guess what our sort of plan is to take the information that we got from you guys today, so specifically looking at the program, so we'll look at, you know, kind of top level of 3, bottom park level of 2, we'll kind of pull that together, but then in addition to that, I'll get some more information on those, kind of multi-sport courts. I'll look at, you know, what the footprint of that is and what goes into that. And we can kind of hyperimpose those on top and see how that would fit in, if we think that would fit in and be appropriate. We'll look into that, and then we'll look into, I guess we don't need to look into challenge course anymore, so I can check that off my list.
Throw us a number so we can say, yeah, it's a dream.
Like a cost?
Yeah.
For another place even
Yeah, for
sometime.
another
Okay,
place.
I can get the information because I probably need the information for some other projects too, but I can get some information and I can see if there's
Just an
information
idea.
from other states.
Yeah.
I honestly think we're not going to find an example that's been around for more than a couple years because they are a pretty new thing. So that is the hard piece with those.
But there's other things that are, I think, like a zip line is like a really
Yep.
fun zip line has been popular, and that's
Yep.
something that's gonna like withstand the time.
Yep.
Doesn't take a significant imprint. It does need its own kind of container space, but something like even just adding something like that, and maybe we
Yep.
figure out what that might look like in a design as an alternative. It's pretty simple, not a huge
Right.
cost, and you can do like double zip line, so you can make it like a bigger thing that it's going to be fun, but not like that whole destination. I mean, people probably would go there for that, but not like the
Yep.
challenge course. So
Right.
that could be a consideration too of where we could.
I
put
would
something
say
like
if you
that.
had some items that you were going to put in there, like we talked about tetherball, that
Yep.
weren't on there, I would say the next rendering include those items in there as
Yep.
well, so that we can see the entire.
Yep, yep, we can
And
include
that
those and
would
where they'll
be-
fit.
When you go to do the public open house, I think it would be important to have those items on there as
Yes.
well when we do the public open house and feedback.
Yes, absolutely.
We're talking about having 2 sport courts, one with basketball and one with tennis. that are floodable? Is that, and does the flooding, how does that cause faster deterioration of the sport court? Is that,
Right, I would have to look into that. I don't have an answer on that right now.
I can't.
But I think they
flooding
generally,
them every year is,
I think they generally have that, I don't even know if it's rubber or plastic or some sort of composite. I feel like when they're using it for tennis or basketball, they'll have that kind of gridded surface on there. I'm fairly certain they remove that when they flood the surface, is my understanding.
Yeah, I'd have to
of
do a little
those.
more, check in with some
Yeah.
suppliers of that.
But I can look into that both for footprint and for maintenance, because my concern with that is, right now, we have all of our courts on kind of that top level of the park, and I think the footprint for that kind of boarded-in sport court is going to be bigger than what we're seeing here. So then is that moving to the south side, or kind of to the bottom side? And if so, where are we making those kinds of trade-offs? So I
Yeah.
think what we'll end up doing as next steps is we'll kind of come back with 2 different drawings to show you guys whether or not those go to an open house. We can kind of pull some just rough line work on here to kind of get a sense of size and kind of work with Jamie and talk through the feasibility of some of those items we've discussed tonight, to kind of see what the next steps are in moving forward and getting some more feedback from the public. So
Thank you.
I think that's what we've got.
Thank you.
Thank
A
you
lot of
guys.
great progress, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you
I
guys.
got one more question.
Of course.
So going back to the sport court and the rinks, so would that just be a flooded rink, or would you actually put down like coolant coils?
It would be a flooded rink.
Yeah.
Flooded rink, okay. Has the person ever checked into like getting those coolant coils? I mean, because they do have portable systems.
Haven't checked into, it's been a couple years since we talked hockey rinks and what to do. You're talking like the coils that have like refrigeration and
Yep.
have not, certainly could, but I don't know a lot about it, so it'd be some research.
Sounds expensive.
Yeah, I think that's why there was the challenge out at Fenway, and that's why they didn't
Okay.
use that space out there. It was just the cost
was
for
kinda-
that.
That was my next question, is why did that never happen out there, so, okay.
I think that was part of the reason, is the cost and location. I think they decided to do something else, so
outdoor ice is becoming
challenging.
shorter and shorter. The season for it's getting shorter.
And I think it's the amount of staff hours that Public Works puts into that is probably one of the biggest buckets of time and they spend is maintaining and getting good ice and then maintaining it. And then with the climate we've had over the last couple of years, it's been a challenge to keep that ice consistent, to keep it maintained well, because if we're gonna put in the time and resources, you wanna put out a good product. And I think Public Works has done a fantastic job at that. But yes, the seasons are getting shorter and the weather, this last year was extremely challenging. We had great ice early, then it warmed up and we started at ground one again, like we had to start over, and it took a while to rebuild that ice, and snow came and it was challenging. So I think that it is something to be cognizant of. If that's, we're putting a lot of investment into the staff time just to get the ice prepped and maintained.
All right,
Any other last comments or?
thank you.
Nice job.
Thank you guys for your time. We
Thank
went a
you.
little bit over what we were supposed
That's
to,
okay.
but thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Jamie, can you bring up the PowerPoint that I sent
Yeah, I
you?
just need a second here.
So while Jamie's bringing that up, I was thinking with the budget planning for the city coming around the corner here, budget planning, I think, starts in June. I was thinking that I think, as a park commission, have an opportunity to think about some strategic investments and how they relate to our strategic planning. And I'm not sure that the commission has done this in the past, but I put together some thoughts, and I want to have a conversation today about some thoughts for strategic planning. I thought it might be nice just to get us all on the same page as to where we're at with strategic planning, and then some possible budget items that we could bring forward to the city council from an investment standpoint. What I put together here would be an additional ask above and beyond what the baseline budget is right now for the Parks and Recreation area. So again, what you're gonna see is not all-inclusive. It's not a line item. Here's the different appropriations and what's in there. This is above and beyond what the baseline budget is right now. So I think we have an opportunity to really think about, I think our landscape's gonna change quite a bit, just based on some research that I did, and so.
I'm just gonna have to, apparently that wasn't working, so let me just have a second here.
I thought that I would bring it up and we could talk about it, but it needs a conversation. So these are just the willy-nilly thoughts of Terry.
Okay, hold on.
So,
Nice willy-nilly.
And just before, so Terry wanted to lead this as part of the budget subcommittee with, I think, Tim Gary is on that. But from a city staff perspective, first round of budgets are due early June, I believe, tentatively June 11th. Then we'll do an internal review, and then I believe they get turned over to city council kind of right around that same time. So I'll be looking at our existing programs budget, which is what we do our entertainment and things, program events. Dave Adams primarily manages the park maintenance budget. Have some say and involvement in there, but he's kind of the lead on that budget as well. So just kind of need to start some conversation about what Parks Commission is interested in, so.
so what I was looking to talk about was just the level set on the current scope of our parks, lakes, and trails inventory. Touch base again on the strategic planning and where we're at, and then just some budget recommendations. So if we flip to the next one. I do think it's both interesting and important that we're all on the same page and know from an amenities standpoint what we have available. So I did pull together just what our profile looks like from a parks, lakes, and trails standpoint. So we do have the 23 parks. I think we have the 2 premier parks, the Lakeside and the Fenway, which I think are important to recognize because there is also an economic aspect to those from a community standpoint. I also found it interesting because I did a lot of research on communities of similar population size as ours and what they have from a park standpoint. And I think we have a wide variety in comparison to some of the communities that are along the same population lines as us, having the golf course, having the senior center, the community garden. With our group, Lakes and Trails falls under us as well. I know we focus quite a bit on parks, but I think we are going to need to make some investments and focus on lakes and trails. So I want to make it really clear that I only pointed out 2 major lakes here. I know that there are other important lakes within the city, but just pointing out 2 of the major as an example for this. We are connected to one trail system. And I think the feedback is telling us that we need more connections there as well. And then I think we're unique from a community standpoint in that we do offer a lot of special events to our community to bring the community together. And I think it's important to note that and look at it as we look at our current inventory and what we have, so. If nothing else, we're all on the same page as to what we have, right?
Right,
We got it in one slide, so. The piece as it relates to strategic planning, so what I found interesting was I went back and looked at, before we were on this commission, I think Jason and Karen would have been the 2 that were on the commission at that time, but when the original 2040 comp plan was developed, there were 22 recommendations in that 2040 comp plan, which stemmed from the work that you guys did. And I know we had an opportunity late last year to take a look at that as well. But there is a significant amount of work in there, and it ranged from protecting the natural habitats through the use of best management for storm and storm runoff to developing and implementing policy guidelines for parks and recreation. So it ran, like I said, it ran the gamut. Our group started some strategic planning process where we gathered community input. And one of the things I think is important for us is to recognize that that input comes in different ways. And it doesn't always have to be a face-to-face meeting. So we had that session where we had the open house and allowed people to come and provide feedback. We also gathered that through social media, where we posted on Facebook and we did the Nextdoor app looking for feedback. And then all of us connected with our connections to get feedback. So as a result of that work, we had 77 requests for initiatives and activities related to the parks, lakes, and trails. I mean, again, that was another place where it hit the gamut of everything. And at that time, we hadn't even thought about the BELTS survey, but now we have, at the time I did this presentation, we had over 400. I think she said we had 500 and some, but, so we've got, I think, a lot of initiatives and activities that we want to accomplish and that clearly the citizens want us to accomplish. I know we've put a slight timeout or a pause on the strategic planning, but one of the things we did do was break the initiatives that we had into those categories. So we now have the policies and procedures team, the program and events team, the budgeting, the partnership agreements, maintenance and improvements, and capital improvements. If you look at those buckets, they tie back to those 77 requests. They tie back to the things in the 2040 comp plan. And it gives us an opportunity to have some personal ownership in some of those areas and bring forward some of the efforts. So where we're at this point is we've identified a lot of activities. We've created some categories for this strategic initiatives. And we're going to take a slight pause while we wait for the city council, who is actively working on the strategic planning now, to set some direction for the city as a whole. And then we'll get back together and we'll be able to work on our strategic plan that aligns with the direction of the city council, so that we're all kind of rowing the boat the same way. Had to use that because we're parks, lakes, and trails.
Oh, boy.
Rowing, right?
Nice.
We caught that
Nice.
right away.
Okay. All right. So that's kind of the strategic plan update, but I think it's going to be really important as part of that strategic planning, because the appetite is much bigger than what we can accomplish, that we really emphasize the strategic part of the planning and really try to determine what it is we're going to do. From a fiscal or budgeting standpoint, I mentioned that it starts in June. I do think we are in a unique position to be able to really think about, what we need and what our budget requests would look like. One of the things that I did was take a look at our current inventory, the strategic plan, where it's at and where it may end up, and looked at some of the gaps and the issues that I think we're facing. And then also thinking about the future health of the parks, lakes, and trails, as I thought about what additional fiscal investments we could make. And so I took those things and I basically put them into two categories. Category one was additional resources, where I would be making a recommendation that we add some people and some technology, and then also a capital improvement bucket, which falls back into kind of the people and technology piece of it. As we look at our current inventory, I mentioned this earlier, we have a lot of variety, and we have some other needs that need to be met along with those. There's some unique circumstances. We have a golf course and a senior center that comes with additional responsibilities and maintenance agreements. We have, some premier athletic complexes where if we manage those right, we have the opportunity, again, to bring people into this community. And I think generate some some future growth from an economic development standpoint. So if we do it right, we can leverage off of our existing inventory. But you can also see that things are changing, because as you look at those 77 items that we had in that 2040 comp plan, there were multiple requests for community programming. So you can see in that feedback the need for multi-sport tournaments. That was in a variety of different areas. It wasn't just softball, it was hockey, pickleball is another one that comes up. So looking at that piece of community programming, there were things like dance lessons in there and other activities from that standpoint. We saw a lot of feedback as we clustered those together. There was a lot of feedback about trail connections or just safe connections to navigate around the community. If you look at Forest Lake Happenings or the Nextdoor app, you'll periodically see additional requests there for safe access points and trail connectivity. There were requests for us to look at the water. We've heard feedback that there are public access spots that are not being maintained, and so what do we look at doing with those? We've had requests for looking at exploring partnerships with the DNR and some docks that could be put out there. So, we've got this existing inventory we have to take care of, but we also have to think about other issues that are either a need, or we also have to think about catching up. We're behind in some of the maintenance areas. We made an attempt at Southview. We know we need to do something with Southview. I'll say we weren't successful last year, but it doesn't mean it goes off the radar. We have to strategically be thinking about how we keep pace and how we keep pace with our current inventory and how we move us forward with the needs that are here. We're hearing about Clear Lake Park as well. So just making sure, again, that as we look at inventory, again, we're managing both strategically. So I think that was it on that one. I'm trying to hurry you guys, I'm sorry. So I want to talk a little bit about on this slide, just as we think about the strategic planning and where things are at here, I think it's going to be really important to look at the current and future community needs. And one of the things that I took a look at is the growth and where that growth is going to happen within the city. As we think about programs that we're going to have, if you look at one of the examples that came to mind was looking at the housing. So if you look at those who live in the housing that they own, it dropped from 77% in 2013 to 74% in 2017. And we can see that with some of the growth that we see with park dedication funds and apartment buildings that are coming into play. So I think as we think about, the community and the demographics changing and how people are living in this community, it's potentially going to change how we think about parks and recreation programs in the future. Our population, it's interesting, if you look at that same time frame from 2013 to 17, the different age categories of our population has not made a significant change, with exception to the baby boomers. That category has changed quite a bit. It's made almost a 5% jump in how our age categories are shifting as a community. So if we were to take a look at, we hear feedback about, hey, we got to meet this age, we got to meet that age, but we don't have the facts or the figures to back that up. So I think it would be nice to be able to invest some additional time and resources into, what do the demographics look like and how are they projected to change as we think about what we want to do with strategic planning. Community and business growth, I think, needs to be taken into consideration. If the comp plan has a goal of 9,200 employment opportunities by 2040, how does that change our landscape, and do we need to do anything different there? The city strategies related to economic development, I think we should be taking into consideration too. Again, if you look at that comp plan, there's very detailed goals of, they want different activities to bring people into this community. They want the community to look certain ways to try to bring businesses in. What do those goals mean to us, and how do we incorporate that into our strategies? And then last but not least, it's only a matter of time before the economy changes. So what are the future, what are they projecting as to when the next downfall in the economy is going to happen? Because we know that will have a huge impact to us when you think about new development and dedicated park funds. So as we think about what we're doing and what big investments we're making, I think we need to make sure that we can sustain those for the long run, or that we can, if we make a decision today, we can pay for it tomorrow if there is a turn in the economic conditions. And it would be nice to be able to focus some time in that area as well, and really trying to get a handle on what are economists projecting, when is that going to happen, and what's it going to look like, and what does it mean to us. So then I looked at gaps, issues, and investments. And I think partnerships is an area where we have maybe a little bit of a gap, and we have an opportunity to invest more. When I think about, I go back, to when Jamie first started. If you think about the community partnerships that we had at that time, we didn't have the YMCA when she started. We didn't have the MOST program. We didn't have Health Up. So we have a lot more community programs where everybody's vying to take care of the community, and everybody's kind of doing that in their silos, and nobody's holistically looking at it overall. And I think a lot of those programs tie back to parks, lakes, and trails. And I think we have an opportunity to coordinate those a little bit better. One of the examples that comes to mind, we were trying to plan the spring fling, and we picked a date, and then we learned there were 5 other activities in the community. Well, if we had a resource, or we were able to invest more time coordinating that, that might help us with some of these partnerships. We've also talked about having a strategic plan to go out and ask for sponsorship. There are a lot of nonprofit organizations in our community and businesses in our community who have a commitment to want to give back to the community, but they don't know how. And so right now, they're coming to us and saying, hey, I want to do this. And it's creating kind of this, what I call the 5-alarm fire. All of a sudden, we're sitting here and we're like, oh, somebody wants to give us money. Where do we want to put it? Instead of strategically working on that. And I think that there's an opportunity to create a partnership program that has a financial contribution tied to it, but we need that time and that effort to be able to do that. It's clear that the partnerships are important, and I just think there are more there, and everybody is needing some coordinated effort there, and I think that that would benefit the community as well. So communication and outreach, which is my next slide, I think we have some pretty significant gaps there and opportunities for investments. I'm going to share, I don't know if you guys pay attention to the Forest Lake happenings or some of those other sites, but I tend to pay attention to them, especially when it's park-related stuff. And really, if we do communication right, it really is an opportunity to educate our community on the programs that are available. It's an opportunity to create a package that the businesses in this community can use to drive people here. It just all the way around has a lot of benefits to us. It creates trust, it creates transparency, and it keeps people in our community. So back on March 9th, there was this whole dialogue that happened on the Forest Lake Happenings website. And somebody just wanted to know if there was T-ball in Forest Lake. And this conversation went back and forth. Well, there is, but it's full, or you can do this, but it's only girls through FLA, and it's boys through this. And I mean, I'm on Parks, Lakes, and Trail, and I was confused watching it. I was really disheartened when somebody said, go to this other city, they have a good program. So our own community members are so confused about what's available and how to get it, that they're pushing people into other communities where it's easier to figure out and understand. So I think, we have an opportunity from a communication standpoint. I also looked at some of our stats just because I was curious. Social media is where it's at, and I think we potentially have, the Parks and Recs is the biggest area that uses that for the city, but I think we have some opportunities. So I took a look at when we use that, what kind of activity do we see? So Jamie just shared the Arts in the Park schedule. It had 88 shares, 92 likes, and 11 comments, like that. The Spring Fling had 57 shares, 38 comments, and 77 likes. So just imagine if we had some dedicated effort around social media and how we were going to manage that and use it, what it would be like for us. I took a look, and Jamie, can you switch to the next one, because it's related to, this is a technology slide, but in with technology is a communication component of that. So I took a look at Twitter just out of curiosity, and I look at Wyoming PD as an organization who has done social media well. I can tell you that Wyoming PD has been asked to share with other government agencies, not only law enforcement, but other government agencies, how they do their social media because they've been so successful with it. So from a communication standpoint, we have 673 followers of Twitter in Forest Lake. Wyoming Police Department has 40,000 followers. So if you can imagine, if we make some investment here, what a difference it could potentially make. We have, what did I say, 3,000 people that liked, 3,132 likes on one of our postings, and our followers, 3,308 followers of our Facebook page. Wyoming PD has 18,782 followers of their Facebook page. So, technology and investment there might be worth helping us get our message across a little bit more. I did notice that the city uses Civic Plus as their website provider. If you go to the homepage in the right-hand corner, it shows you who they use. I did a little research, and Civic Plus has a platform that is designed for parks and recreations, where it has some calendaring functionality that would potentially allow us to look at calendaring of all the activities in one centralized location. It would let you do scheduling for fields. It overall, there's some ticketing concepts there if we ever wanted to have tickets for some, but it overall provides more park and rec technology functionality that I think we could leverage to bring these different community organizations together. We have FLA, and we really don't know, from a tournament standpoint, what's out there and, what's happening. It puts it all in one area, and it allows for the functionality of users to create a user ID and a password and be able to log in and not only manage their own activity, but see the global view as well. So I think we've got some gaps, and I think we could potentially resolve them. So I'm almost there. I also looked at the future health and stability of us, and one of the things that, we used to talk about what keeps you up at night from a contingency planning perspective. And one of the things that keeps me up at night is our succession plan as a Parks, Lakes, and Trails Commission. I mean, Jamie has not indicated that she wants to leave, but we have one person that is managing the entire Parks, Lakes, and Trails of the organization. And I think from a succession planning standpoint and an employee development standpoint, we have some opportunities here. I did take a look at, so what I did was look at what the current population is for Forest Lake. And then I went out and looked at League of Minnesota Cities and those that have populations that are similar to ours. And then I researched their park areas. These were the ones that I was able to research. I looked at Stillwater as well, but I could not tell if Stillwater had one or multiple people, so I left it off the list. But these are all cities that are comparable in size and have more than one person that manages their parks, lakes, their parks programs. And depending upon, it could be a golf course or some other things. But the bottom line is they have more than one person that manages that. And that is able to help strategically plan and help their parks commissions. So I thought that was kind of important to note. So from a budgeting standpoint, what I would like to see is us create a Parks, Lakes, and Trails, I would say, department, for lack of a better term. I would like to see us invest in a full-time employee as a park, either a park coordinator or a customer service representative. I think titles and salary, obviously I need to have conversations with the city administrator to figure out what that would look like and what the salary structure is for the city of Forest Lake. But I would look at this role as working in conjunction with the Parks and Recreation manager and handling some of the administrative work so that the Parks and Rec manager can focus more on some of the strategic things that we've talked about. So looking at adding one position, so if you look at the org chart I put there, you'd have the city administrator, you would have the park manager. As far as the park manager goes, I was looking at it as a reallocation of Jamie's position because the things that are listed there, she has gradually taken on over time. So again, we talked about partnerships. The number of partnerships have grown and the investment those partnerships need has grown. So I saw it more as a reallocation versus the addition or posting of another position. So if you look at, can you move your little clicker? Sorry. So if you look at the org chart, it would be a parks manager, and underneath that would be either a coordinator or customer service type of role. You'd still have your seasonal part-time staff that, would either be your warming house or your, security guard isn't the right term.
Rangers.
Thank you, rangers. And then all your contracts and your vendors, so the Woodies of the world and the other vendors that we're working with, as they're doing parks work. And then that partnership being in line with the Public Works Superintendent, who does have positions that are dedicated to park, and the Parks Manager working closely with the Parks Superintendent to indirectly manage the work of those positions. So in a nutshell, we'd be looking at adding one position at that customer service type or admin type level and reallocating one position. So if we flip to the next slide, I was thinking it might be valuable to invest in an internship program. What I was thinking about here was somebody who is up to date on the most current trends as it relates to communications in social media and graphic designs, who could come in for a short duration and help develop a communication strategy that would help us maximize the use of the social media and other digital communication that we do. And then was also looking at adding that module that I talked about for the technology and which is called Civic Rec, which would be part of that Civic Plus tool. So if we flip to the next slide, from an investment standpoint, again, I'm going to make the disclaimer multiple different times. I haven't talked to the city administrator about this, so I'll explain where I got budget dollars, but they may not be appropriate budget dollars, and they may not be appropriate titles. This is more for conversation and to see whether or not there's appetite to do something like this. So I was looking at park manager. Again, the only funding is the difference between any increase that would come from where Jamie is now to where the reallocation played out. So this range is based off of research that I did on different park manager roles that are available across the Twin Cities. The full-time customer service representative or coordinator, that range is based off of, right now, the city of Shoreview has a posting. And some of the duties that they are looking at that role to do aligns with some of the things I was thinking about. So that salary is what is there based on that posting. I'm not sure that this would need to be a full-time person. It may need to be, a 20-hour type of person, and that would be a conversation, I think, with city administrator and looking at what responsibilities are there. So that would also play into that salary projection. The intern program, I was looking at potentially starting in January and going through August. I put a tag of $20,000 on there. That was based on an internship posting that one of the cities had at $15 an hour with some of the similar duties. And then the Civic Rec program, I think it was either 4,500 or 4,700 to add that module, so I round that up to 5,000 as a potential budget item. So with that, I'm going to stop and see if there are questions or comments or thoughts on this, and then I'd like to know if you guys have ideas or thoughts on investments.
Well, I got a comment.
Yeah.
I think it's a great job, man. You did a wonderful presentation here and got lots of information. Interestingly enough, you and I are kind of on the same page, because I was thinking about all the work that Jamie has to do when we keep piling on to her. So I kind of took it on myself, excuse me, to call Rasmussen Business College, Pine City Tech, and Anoka Tech, just to see what it would take to, what the process would be to find people who are involved in either marketing or computer or just business admin. And if they still had programs that you could hire these people, but then it would be subsidized by government or other programs. So that in looking at these programs here, I thought, okay, again, if you had an intern and we don't have the immediate money for that right now, but if we could get them involved in a program that would subsidize their wages, maybe we could work that piece of it out. The other thing I thought about was that, Jamie's doing everything from creating things down to billing people and scheduling. And it was kind of my thought is, I realize that she's making about $250,000 a year, but she should be doing those more expensive things rather than doing administrative things. Yeah. And so that was kind of my justification for going out and just kind of checking this thing out. And I wasn't able to talk to anybody because some of the schools are already out for the season. Other people were on sabbaticals and coming back for summer term. But everybody did tell me that there are programs out there that could subsidize this, so that as an example, if we knew that, I know that some of these grants that have to be written, maybe that would pay for something. But if Jamie's so overworked that she can't get that program going, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot. So if we go out and get somebody to take off some of those admin things that she could free herself up for doing the grants or whatever else, And she would actually, by being able to provide the ability to get these grants and these different programs, would certainly compensate for the expenditure to hire that person. So no, I think you did a great job, and I'm behind you 100%. And like I said, I've got some people calling me back, but it's gonna be, it could be into June before I hear back.
I was curious when we were gonna have this on the agenda. I'm glad you did it. Thank you very much. This is exceptional job.
Yep.
Just exceptional.
Yep.
I'd increase the numbers here, so we can get somebody instead of just going through the mill of putting it out for bid, putting it out, because there aren't many people out there.
Nicely done.
What's our current budget, I guess overall, just looking at what the ask would be from a percentage increase? Did you happen to?
For a percentage increase
I
of the
guess of our-
total budget?
Yeah, for our parks, lakes and trails, is there a department budget? And then are we, so I'm just rough math here, 65, is it $75,000, $85,000 of an ask? What is that percentage to our total budget?
I don't know that because these figures are they're not based on the city of Forest Lake. And that's the piece where I think it's really important to have that conversation with Patrick. The other piece of it is, again, thinking about that park manager, I was thinking about it more as a reallocation. So you don't have the full salary amount, you would have the difference. Because as you think about the reallocation process, a reallocation says, here's the things that are in the PD or the position description that the individual is doing. And then gradually over time, they've taken on additional responsibilities that they're basically not being compensated for. So as I think about that work, Jamie's doing some of this work. Like the partnerships is a perfect example.
understand that.
So I don't know, you wouldn't be looking at a full 65 to 80. It would be
And
whatever
that's
the
why,
difference
I
is.
looked at,
So-
well, and I looked at 65 and 80 as a whole, guesstimating what that increase on the park manager side, I didn't take that in consideration.
Yeah,
at all, but
and I
Just a
don't,
curiosity thing. I mean, if we're asking for a 20%, a 20% increase, how likely is that gonna be
Yeah.
versus a
Yeah.
5% increase?
Yep.
So,
Yep, and I think that is a really important thing that we do need to flesh out. And I think once we have a better idea of the salary, then we'd be able to, flesh that out or adjust it. The internship program is another good example. That was based on full-time hours. We may not need full-time hours there to do some type of an internship.
Well, sometimes on those internships, if they're taking their internship for credit, they don't get paid.
Correct.
They pay the school for the credits, and then they work for you for free.
Yep, yep.
So again, we could look at something like that through one of these, or
Yeah.
any other school for that matter. I mean, I guess we could even talk to the high school and the distributive ed and see if there's any kid up there that could work part-time. But those internships could actually be a free employee.
They could. I looked at that when I made the recommendation for a salary there. I looked at what we did when I worked for the state of Minnesota and just making sure, kind of back to Jack's point, we get somebody that has some good qualifications. And so at the state of Minnesota, when they do the college internship programs, they are paid. So we would potentially miss out on some premier candidates if we didn't compensate for that. And that was just my thought process behind it. And then obviously that would be open for conversation and discussion, but I just wanted to share my thought process
I remember
behind it.
like my son did a civil engineering internship, and he was
Yeah.
a free civil engineer. Because
Yeah.
He paid for the credits and didn't get paid for the work.
Yep, yep,
And they have some fresh ideas and excitement to do the work.
yeah, yeah. So. Doug, Jason, Karen, thoughts?
See, I think that doing something like this will allow us to move forward faster. I think we're constrained by all of the stuff that Jamie has to get involved with. So I would support doing something like this to offload the lesser functions to allow Jamie to work on the primary tasks of the job of the more expensive things we would pay for.
I think it's exciting too. I'm still trying to get my head around, we have new groups of people, because I'm still had to beg to go full-time for a job that was definitely time and a half. And so I'm looking at this as going, wow, this would be great. And maybe, with different people, it would be feasible. But that is quite a jump.
Yep,
And so
Yep.
we'd have to justify what it's going to do.
yep.
But certainly a growing community. You have to grow with it.
And so I just wanted to interject quick, so thank you, Terry, for leading this conversation. I think your role as the Parks, Trails, and Lakes Commission is to identify what some needs that you have, and if these are needs, I think then my job is to kind of circle back and look at some of the financial impact. I can get the report for Tim, and to everybody to kind of see what percent of increase, but any other recommendations on our program side that we might be missing. I know our entertainment budget's right now at $31,500. We've been at that same amount for a few years, and I think that's been fulfilling our needs, given that we've continued to build partnerships and have had some donations and sponsorships come in, and like to continue to pursue that. I think the plan for next year, we're trying to phase out some of our vendors at Arts in the Park that might be more of a business-related vendor right now, and so we've given that communication to them that this is the last year that you'll fit within the vendor criteria, and that next year that will not be an option. So hoping to get in some good sponsorships next year to offset some of the expense with the Arts in the Park, and maybe even like a bigger sponsorship package. Hopefully we can find a way to get to that, but that's kind of our direction. So are there any other needs, thoughts on potential budget items? And
Which was my next slide.
oh, I didn't know. Okay.
But it's the
Sorry.
same thing that
There
you're
we go.
asking.
Word for word.
Just on time-wise with Jamie, I mean, just for the spring fling, there's hours upon hours on getting things and setting things up, and it would be a huge investment to have another person on board with that.
I think, and I know Kathy can probably speak to this too, I think that we're kind of hearing at other entities and meetings with Health Up and trying to revitalize that in partnership with the YMCA in Washington County. We've got Wellness 50 Plus started, so they're a group kind of functioning themselves. They're running independently, and I think they're hearing quite frequently among other groups of how do we find out where everything's happening for adults, for seniors, for youth. And I also saw that chain of conversation about the T-ball, and I was confused of boys a certain age have to go to FLA versus girls with community ed or whatnot. And so I was confused, and I think that even though we don't run the programming, I feel like the city's missing out on helping communicate some of that. So I think that there's been that conversation or the need for that piece of it. So I think, if there's a way that we can help, if, somebody's focused on that, or if it's myself, I think that's been a challenge.
Well, and it removes the silos and it brings them together, because I think that is the missing link. Everybody in their own silo plans these activities that are related to community health and wellness, which to me falls under the parks area, and Jamie's already attending those, and so let's use that time more wisely and shed some of the pushing paperwork stuff, I guess, for lack of a better term.
I went to one of those meetings too, and it comes up whether you're working with school or city or the why. I mean, how do you communicate? Where do you put the information? Everybody is in a different area, the
Yeah.
seniors, they don't use that social media at
Right.
all. And yet everyone else seems to. The papers, they're getting less and less subscriptions. Is there a major board somewhere? I mean, how do people go? If anyone can answer that question, it'd be a $100,000 event, because getting the information to the people is the hardest part.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, community board somewhere, I don't know.
Yeah, those were my thoughts about investment. I didn't see the need for the Arts in the Park change, because I know we have recently gotten one sizable sponsorship for that, and I think if we put together a sponsorship program, we can fund some of these park programs a little bit better there too as well, so. So I don't know if anybody else has thoughts on investments, or if you do, if you could send me, is that okay? Can they send it to me, or do they have to send it to you? I don't know, like quorum wise.
You can communicate individually, just not more,
Okay.
4 or more in an email chain, so you can't reply to all. So I think someone could certainly send it to you and copy me, or we can work on that, because I'll have to start
Okay.
looking
All right.
at piecing that together.
Okay,
And there's a process in the budget. I'm more involved this year in that, and so submitting it with kind of that justification or what the need is for that. And then it does go through a review process, and obviously eventually to city council. I think in July is the time frame for that, July or August. So good starting point, and can follow up.
all right. So we'll move on to pickleball benches.
I was just able this afternoon to hear from a pickleball proponent that the Lions have money available that they have to spend, and this would fall into their criteria. So they were asking the Parks, Trails, Lakes and Trails Commission to come up with an ask for 6 benches to be put out at Fenway with the pickleball, because it is a very social event. If you've gone out there and watched, many people sit and wait, they get kind of brought in to the game. They don't maybe necessarily go and play for 2 hours. It's a group that plays for 2 hours and they're in and out, so they need a place to sit. They've been bringing in their own chairs and setting them up, and it's just, as long as the Lions saw a need that they could fulfill, they wanted us to come up with an ask. Now, Jamie did come up with something today that we could discuss it, but she would have to look into the liability of having benches inside. Is that possible or not? Maybe putting them outside if it isn't, but doing some more research. But he wanted me to bring it up tonight to see, and others too, I think he talked to you,
Right?
so that they'd have something that they can send them, and it has to be by June 30th, I believe, is what I remember from the email, that they have to spend this money. So it's kind of an urgent thing, but it's a good thing if it could be worked out. And I know there's benches inside tennis courts.
Yeah, I think you'd wanna keep the benches outside though.
Think so?
Yep, just so you don't run into them.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Tennis people don't run into them, and they're a lot more frisky than pickleball
You're
players.
saying they're gonna
Well, that therein lies the problem.
me, or?
Yeah.
The tennis players are more
Well, that's, I
coordinated.
think, something they'd have to look into, but certainly it'd be more fun, and there are 4 there now that are inside.
Yeah,
So it'd be a lot more fun and socialization to have them inside than have to put them outside, but that's
so I
something.
think when I'm down in Florida, most of the benches I see in Florida are outside.
Really?
Because what you do is you go up, you set your paddle on the fence, so that's your line, and then you sit on your bench and you talk to people and whatever else.
You don't watch the game, you're watching the other direction?
No, you're sitting, the game is here, I have my paddle on the fence.
So the bench is looking this way?
The benches are looking into
Oh.
into
Interesting.
the game, yeah, so you get to watch the game. from
Yeah.
there.
We have windscreens, right? So
Mhm.
can you,
Right,
can't sit on the outside and look
yeah,
in.
that's right.
Well, it's something that, I just heard tonight about the problem of liability, and certainly something you have to look into, but to me, to have it inside would be much more advantageous for the whole reason of having them and putting the similarity if there's already 4 in there.
Yeah, so I guess my take on that, I did a quick research, and just from a facilities management standpoint and developing facilities, you always have to take safety obviously into consideration. Pickleball's kind of a up and coming thing, so it's not something that I recall studying about or understanding that facilities management piece to it. Did a quick search, and a lot of the pictures I saw of pickleball courts did not have benches within the play area. Pickleball doesn't seem to be an extremely aggressive sport where you're running out of bounds, but you trip and fall, you could hit a bench or what have you. So I just would feel a little more comfortable understanding what other communities do in the development of pickleball courts. Yes, we do have 4 in there. There's one individual bench so we don't have any doubles next to each other. So there's 4 benches within there, and I feel comfortable with that. But you're there to, I understand the social element of pickleball, but when you're within the fenced-in area with the courts, you're there to play. Are we, do we want extra people in there? Is it a park rule, or a rule that we need to look at of like limited to capacity, so we don't have 50 people waiting on the sidelines, and then you have safety concerns with interfering with play if someone does, kind of go towards the perimeter, trips and falls. Just wanted to at least have time to explore that, because I think that's something we should think about. The more we put physical benches we put in the play area, play space, obviously you're gonna be inviting more people. I know people do bring chairs in, they're softer. If someone runs into them, they're gonna probably just collapse, or the chairs will, condense down. So just wanted to at least make sure everyone's understanding of that and look at kind of best practices for pickleball courts, if there are any, with seating and capacity. I have seen some where there's bleachers on the outside of the fence. Again, we do have the wind screens. Those can be like taken up or down as needed, but maybe there's one space maybe there's a paddle rack or a paddle system to hold your spot, and then seat more capacity for seating outside of the pickleball court. So any discussion on that tonight would be.
I'm with the Lions, and I don't know if there's that money available.
That's what he just put an email in this afternoon, but that's all I know.
I'm not sure. You'd have to double check on that.
So he wasn't at the budget meeting, and we were, and there was the allocation of the budget funds was done and then approved at the regular meeting last week. And if I recall correctly, we were pretty down to the wire, our funds were pretty much spent. So.
Well, we'd certainly have to look at that first to see if it's anything she even puts time into looking at.
Right.
And then if he is correct and they've got this wonderful money sitting there that they have to spend.
So what we advised the Lions to do was that, because oftentimes the Lions and the city, people are coming back and forth, so the request will come to the Lions to make a donation for pickleball benches. And our comment, because we sit on both, our comment is Lions shouldn't be considering funding this until the park board has had the opportunity, or the park commission has had the opportunity to discuss it and either approve it or deny it. And once they've done that, then we can go back to the Lions and say, we'd like to make this investment. It's been approved by the Parks, Lakes, and Trails Commission. Here's the dollar amount we're looking for. So
I think that was his plan for tonight, that he would bring it and that you would look at it, discuss it, see how feasible it is, because they have to have some information too to go to the Lions with. So I don't, maybe maybe it's all wrong, the figures that he's got, first of all. But secondly, I think he was just looking for the avenue. How do you do it? Who do you go to? Because you want to make a donation. They ask the Parks, Lakes, and Trails, could you use them there? If yes, that's a good thing. If no, is there something else?
yeah, I'm not sure that the entire Lions want to make that donation. So I would say if a community member has a request for something that they want at one of the Parks, Lakes, and Trails, to me, the first step would be to come to the Parks, Lakes, and Trails meeting as part of the open forum and make a request to us and give us the opportunity to either discuss it or do research. And if we say yes to it, then, and they're saying the Lions may fund it, if we've given that approval, then whoever's requesting that request can take it back to the Lions and say, it has been approved for us to do this contingent upon the Lions funding it in the amount of. Do the Lions approve of funding it in the amount of? That, to me, would be how the process.
I'm hearing you kind of say there may be some non-communication between the Lions over this particular project.
Yeah, I'm just not sure. Again, to me, whether they're with the Forest Lake Lions or the Rotary or whatever the case might be, or just a Boy Scout, if they want something added, to me, the right forum would be to bring it forward either in the open forum and tell us what you're looking for, and if we approve it, you know, if you have a funding source that's gonna cover it, just like the Boy Scouts, when they did the free library down, the libraries, they came and said, hey, we wanna put up this library, or the little book box down at Lakeside, this is what it's gonna cost, and I'll cover that cost, do you approve it? And we as a commission approved it, and then they worked with Jamie. I think in this, it's a similar situation. You have a group that's looking to wanna add something to one of the parks. And this gets back into that burnt marshmallow or 5-alarm fire. If we just have to spend money to spend it, and we can't have the time to research it, I think we wait and we research it. But I would propose, if you know what the dollar amount is and we do the research, I wouldn't worry about the timing of the
Well,
money.
and I think that was the problem and for the haste, because this particular money has to be spent by the end of June. And so they want to do a project, they want to do it well, and they didn't have time to maybe do it in the proper way. Maybe they talked to Jamie before they sent the email, I don't know. I just got the email this afternoon, and it said this money was available, this is what they'd like to do, there is a need for that, which I 100% agree with, there's a need for that, to have benches there, wherever you put them.
I think,
the whole
so
thing
there
was-
was some communication, I encouraged the open forum tonight, just asked for more information on, it was 4 benches and 6 benches and placement of the benches. I think that the desire, the request is within the pickleball courts, so that people waiting to play have a place to sit. So I don't know, I've never talked about benches or what placement outside of the court area. So I think, I mean, discussion, but, you know, my gut kind of tells me we should look into it a little bit more. I don't, you know, do we want to encourage more people in that play area? I mean, that space is designated to play pickleball, you know, and I understand there's high volume, but do we want 40 people in there just waiting their turn? I don't know if there should be some form of capacity that we're cluttering that space if that's intended for the use to play pickleball. So I think we just want to cross our T's, dot our I's with that to make sure we're not overpopulating that space, the play space. You know, there's making sure there's enough out of bounds area, things like that.
What is the actual request? They're looking for how many benches and at
4 to
how
6.
much money?
There's already 4 in there, and so they were looking at additional 6.
So we have an individual that wants to add 6 benches to the pickleball courts at a cost of,
3,500.
Yeah, 3,500. Because they've already paid for the 4. They've already put the 4 in. The Lions did.
right.
And so that's where they got their figure from, I'm sure, to do the 6. And just as an aside, being I live over by Belts again, if you remember way back when pickleball first came to Forest Lake, we had many people from the cities that were coming out. It was Friday night. And you'd see the chairs lining the whole thing over there with the pickleball people, because that's what they do. They sit and they wait for their turn to jump in. So Johnny comes out and says, Susie, your turn, you jump in. And so they're part of the whole pickleball mentality is the socialization. They don't sit there and like tennis, you'd see 4 people playing and everybody else is outside because they've got the court. Pickleball is kind of like a family event is how I see it, and they'll bring their chairs. So, but I'm not saying it has to be rushed. I'm saying we might even have wrong information if the whole Lions thing isn't together on this. So
Yeah, and I'm not saying the Lions aren't together. I just know that we just voted on budget items to expend the money that we needed to expend by the end of June. And we just had an update on Thursday. I feel like it was a very low number that was available, and it was not $3,000 or greater. So, because all the budget items had been decided upon. So, I mean, I think
good conversation.
I think if it's something we want to explore as a committee, then we make that decision as a committee. And then if our decision is yes, and only if it's funded by the Lions, then they can take it back to the Lions at that time, once they know we've approved it. But there seems to be this, sitting on both sides, you see they'll come with a request, and I'm surprised because we haven't even talked about it as a board, and respecting this board and what we would want, we should have the say as to what goes into our parks, lakes, and trails versus somebody telling us, and that's not
Suggesting, yeah.
I know, that's not what I mean, but I just trying to respect this committee. When I'm on the other side on that board, the first thing I ask is Parks, Lakes, and Trails approve this? And if the answer to that is no, then my comment is, well, we shouldn't be talking about it at the Lions group until we know what Parks, Lakes, and Trails has done with it. And I just think that,
I think that's what he's looking for tonight, what Parks,
Yeah.
Lakes, and Trails thinks of it.
yeah.
Suzanne, do you guys have any thoughts on it? Do you want me to
Yeah.
check into what other communities do? Do you want to okay it and
Well, I think that,
consideration?
this is a big senior activity, and it is a very social activity. If at the Y, you see everybody standing around the courts waiting for their turn, and everybody's talking to everybody. So this is it gets people out, it gets people active, it keeps people connected to others. So I think this is an excellent kind of thing that we should be encouraging. And if benches encourage it, well then, and if there's an opportunity to partner with somebody to help pay for these, even better. But I think this is an opportunity for mostly for the seniors to keep them connected, keep them active. So I think this is a good thing we ought to pursue.
I'd agree to that. I think we should maybe, look at it, but there's probably a couple questions that we just need to get answered first. One is the money there. Two, is it feasible to put them inside? I think that's the biggest question. And if not, is it even a talking point? Because if they tell you, well, no, they have to be inside, and then we find out that, it is a legal liability or something else, we're kind of wasting our time, so.
Yeah, well, I agree with that as well.
I can get some calls out to other communities who've put in pickleball courts in the last couple of years, get some input on if they have benches within the pickleball perimeter, and circle back. Because I agree that I think that that's an important part of the ask, is to put them next to the existing benches within the pickleball courts for additional seating. I agree that these pickleball courts are used all the time, heavily used by the senior population. I completely support and appreciate that, and I'm grateful that they're utilizing that facility. My job is just to make sure that it's safe and compliant, and that we're not overpopulating that space that's there for the whole community to utilize. And so I'm definitely in support of benches, whether inside or out is a question or not. I think we need to determine that. So happy to get some more information.
And I like to say this is another example of something being thrown on your plate without, determining if you have time for it or not. So if there were somebody else available to do this kind of work, that would certainly free you up.
I think that's one of the challenges, is that when there's time-sensitive items, I also am getting all the vendors for It's in the Park organized and finishing that up this week. And so jumping some of these things, if there's missed opportunities, if funding's sitting there and there's a deadline, that could be where we're missing out on some things. So I'll definitely make some calls quick tomorrow and see if I can get that figured out.
I think this is one where it would not be a missed opportunity. I mean, there will be another budgeting process for the Lions as well. So if the group says yes to this, with the caveat that the Lions would fund it, then it can go back to the Lions for consideration to fund it. And it doesn't necessarily have to be decided on now to be expended by the end of June. It could be part of the next fiscal year of the Lions budget, which would start in July. So I guess if we have to prioritize, I'm not speaking on behalf of the Lions. I'm not saying it would be a yes or a no on behalf of the Lions from a budgeting standpoint, but I will tell you that the Lions always consider budget opportunities when they come to them. And it doesn't matter what time of year it is. So it won't necessarily be a missed opportunity if you don't get it done immediately.
Noted.
One more example why we need a strategic plan in place, and we've got a grocery list of,
Yeah.
of things, you know what, we could use some benches, and,
Yeah.
oh, hey, the Lions want it, they got this coin, let's
Yeah.
go.
Yeah. And then we'd have all the research done and we can just pick it off the list.
Oh, those benches are in now, but we've got cornhole games that we wanna get at the park. Hey, okay, and now a fountain, and we could just get this grocery list, and then it's not
Yeah,
Right.
brought up, it's, you just tell us what's gonna happen.
Yeah,
yeah,
Makes it easy.
yeah,
I agree.
yeah. All right, Lakeside Memorial Park Project.
Just wanted to, brief update. Our project at Lakeside Memorial Park is underway. Themed Concepts is doing the subgrade work. They made good progress last week, but unfortunately didn't get the concrete slab poured prior to the rain this weekend. So conditions as of Monday morning within the container space, pretty wet, pretty soft. So working through them, I know just some emails have come in later today. They took out some of the new Class 5 that they did put in last week. Took some of that out again. They're going to bring some more in. I would say we're slightly delayed, maybe a couple days at this point. We should know more tomorrow. Hopefully they're expecting things to dry out and do a compact test tomorrow afternoon with Public Works. I have Dave Adams involved in the maintenance part of this project. He will be reviewing their foam sample, the concrete mix, and doing a compression test, making sure the proper depths of Class 5 were installed and everything is approved by Dave Adams before they pour concrete. So just a slight delay with some of the weather. Unfortunately, that's where we're at. We did communicate early June. I think maybe we'd still be on track with that. I just need a couple more days to see with more rain coming in where we're going to be. And I think that weather is just that fun factor to deal with. But myself, along with Dave, are keeping a close eye on it, managing the project. And we'll know once we get through this compression test and get concrete poured. So then we'll be back on track. So just a quick update on that. That's it. If anyone has any questions on that.
A lot of people are excited about it.
Yeah, it'll be good, and I'm excited to get through the installation process here. So.
All right, Arts in the Park.
Just a brief update. It kicks off 2 weeks from today. We've rolled out our concert series. I think we have a great lineup. Just working through final vendor payments coming in, processing those, getting all the vendor assignments. I think we have a couple extra food trucks this year, so I think that's looking great. Just a lot of logistical details in these next couple weeks. It's pretty busy getting everything lined up. I think we're going to have upwards of 60 vendors between food trucks, farmers market, vendors. So a lot of coordinating, and I did put people on a waiting list as of about a week ago, and so I've received even like 15 additional applications just because I'm at capacity of processing what we already have, and want to make sure we have space for everybody. So I think it's going to be a great summer. We are looking forward to it and just anxious to get it kicked off in 2 weeks.
I thought the concerts looked really good.
I think you guys did a great job with those final recommendations, and I agree. I think it looks like a very solid and exciting lineup with variety that will hopefully entice different people to come out throughout the summer, and hopefully multiple nights. So you guys did a great job on that.
Anything else, Arts? So commissioner updates? Anybody have updates? Do you guys do like,
Doug has one.
A lake update on Clear Lake. embarking on 2 programs. Carp removal program for the last 2 years. We've been doing studies and analysis to determine the biomass and the age of the carp and the effectiveness of removal, because it's fairly expensive. And so to determine if removing them is going to be kind of a long-term, have a long-term positive impact. And it appears that from the data that we've gotten that it will. We don't have a reproductive or reproducing, the carp are not effectively reproducing in the lake. And so by removing them, we're going to reduce their impact upon the water quality of the lake. And so this week, they're installing box netting, and members of the association are going to be baiting the nets for the next 3 to 4 weeks and springing the traps after a week. And then carp get removed and taken up to the wolf sanctuary in Scandia, where the wolves tend to enjoy the carp. So that's the first thing. The second thing, we've got a whole lake treatment for Eurasian water milfoil that the DNR recommended we do. We received a grant from Washington County. The city of Forest Lake used some funding from the funds that the operator of the marina pays to the city, which is earmarked for lakes improvements. And so we received a grant from the city to offset that. Then the members of the association are paying the largest portion of it. So that begins as soon as the thermocline sets up in the lake. We're going to do the whole lake treatment, which requires adding herbicide throughout the summer. It's a long-term process, requires all summer treatment with herbicides. So that's underway, so that should give us 3 to 5 years of complete absence of milfoil. And I want to thank Jamie and Dan Undum and Kathy Bystrom for you guys finding the funds available, and Kathy for supporting our request of the city. So thank you. I have one question. The clock, the big clock,
Yes.
what's happening with that?
That is a good question. I talked with Dave Adams. We're talking about placement of that and the the engineering piece, the maintenance component of that. So we are going to be brainstorming some ideas of where the placement would be. I know the original request was part of the Veterans Memorial. Talked to that group, and it seems like that project's not happening quite yet or anytime soon, based on funding. And from commission conversation with the Gone building clock, doesn't make sense to have a clock tower right there as well. So talked to Dave about that last week, and we're going to reconnect once we kind of get through these next couple weeks of a busy kickoff to summer events. So probably another update at our June meeting. If you have any other suggestions on placement for that, we'd be open to that. We're brainstorming some ideas that would be best suited for the city.
Did you have something? No.
Tim and Karen and Doug and myself and Jamie went on a kind of a parks tour and checked some things out and try to get some different ideas going with park benches and picnic tables, and so that's on the list.
Yeah, I think the summary of that was we looked at one lake access point. I know there's the interest from the city council and the city, to look at those access points. So we went to North Shore Circle Park, which is identified as one of those public access points, and it currently sits empty. There's a couple dead trees that we're going to have removed. We talked about adding some just seating, like a nice bench for people to sit there. And we talked about possibly a swing set. So I'll bring those concepts back and hopefully soon in June here at our June meeting. But that was the concept there. We went to Southview Park, Bridle Pass Park. Karen did a fantastic job asking every person she saw for input and feedback. We saw it wasn't even warm out and people were swimming with their dogs, off of North Shore Circle Park. So, it was
cold.
that was surprising.
She was great.
So I think it was good we visited Southview again. I know that's kind of a project that we've attempted to move forward with, but need to revisit that. So it was helpful, I think, to get an understanding of where some needs might be and continue to work on moving some of that forward.
I think that Southview, we were talking and just off about dog park there, that it's a hard one to find, but it's one that doesn't seem to benefit having parks equipment down there. I was surprised it was gone, so I know that it's never been real popular. So I was kind of excited at the thought of maybe a dog park somewhere around there.
Anyone
Any
else?
updates? I think you probably all know about the spring fling, how successful that was. And we gave Jamie a bonus because she didn't have to join the Y. She was running around up and down and in and out and up and down. And so it saved her a workout session, I'm sure. But it was so well received from the public. I just heard one after another comment how positive it was. And the petting zoo people were spectacular, I think. So.
Yeah, I think good feedback on that event, something that we can continue to build on and add to for next year. But I think it went well. That using the space here at the city hall was perfect for that kind of event. It was convenient from a location standpoint. We had a lot of space to accommodate parking and people. And I think right from 10 a.m. until 12:45, we had a steady flow of people. So that went well, and appreciate all the volunteers. And I know a couple people, Terry, you put a lot of hours in advance, and people that were there to help, Jason, Karen, you guys, everybody that's been involved in that process, and commission in general of making that tough decision to kind of transition away from what might be the norm and the expectation to try something new and different. And I think that was, good for you guys to be in support of that.
Yeah, I'd agree with, from the Easter egg hunt to this. I mean, it was 20 minutes at Lakeside versus 3 to 4 hours of families and kids having a great time.
They stuck around too,
It was,
which
They really did.
was good.
and it was fun trying to keep the kids in line to get them into the bouncy house, but it was
They have energy.
It's harder to get them out.
they like going up the slide.
Yeah.
They like to bounce a couple times and right up the slide. It's fun time.
And then we had a Fenway advisory.
I was just gonna-
So
yeah.
I'd let one of you guys update on that if you'd like.
I was just gonna say, on the 15th, we had a Fenway Advisory meeting and just did a walkthrough of the walkthrough and where things are at maintenance-wise, and it sounds like those are moving along nicely. And then Commissioner Bystrom, or Councilmember Bystrom, brought forward an idea for the management agreement. And I think that was well received by all of us, just to try to streamline that and clean it up and make it easier for all the parties to understand who's responsible for what, and that was well received by everybody. So the direction was that Jamie and Patrick would go back and work on a draft agreement and bring it back to the group, so. Anything you'd add to that, Jack?
Nothing to add.
All right. Great. Any other updates? Anyone want to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All right, meeting adjourned.
Quick one.
Yeah.